Good evening, friends. Welcome to the discussion on the slot 2 CAT paper today. We are discussing the VARC section. Many students look at VARC as a scoring opportunity. They have their own inherent strengths in that particular section, and they would look at that particular section to offset any lack of scoring opportunities in the other two sections. Students who are strong in VARC, how did they perceive today's afternoon slot paper? Overall, let's first look at the structure of the paper. The structure of the paper was no different from what it was in slot 1 and not very different from what it was last year. In fact, it was just the same. VARC is following the traditional script of having 24 questions, of which 16 are from RC, 4 RC passages with 4 questions each, and 8 questions from the verbal area. Let's take a look at the paper today. We had 4 passages. Total number of questions in each of these passages was 4. The number of non-MCQ questions in the passages was 0. They're all choice-based questions. The verbal ability brought in these 4 question types. We have sentence placement, which was there last year as well, para summary, the odd man out, and para formation, which makes a comeback. So you find that there are traditional areas well represented, and in the odd one out and para formation, obviously these are the non-MCQ questions. Now let's take a look at the first section, the first part of the VARC section, which is the RC passages. When we look at RC passages, there are 2 aspects to every RC passage. One, how easy is the passage to read? And that's what entices people to get into reading the passage and then committing more time towards solving the questions that follow. However, some students also go ahead and look at the questions and then they do decide whether they want to attempt it or not. Whenever we classify a RC passage as easy, moderate, or difficult, we do so on the basis of 1, its readability, and 2, the type of questions that come after the end of the passage. Sometimes you have difficult to read passages, but they are often compensated by easy sounding, easy worded questions, direct questions. Scoring opportunities abound. However, sometimes we have traps. We have very easy sounding or easy to read RC passages, but they're followed by some stinkers of questions in terms of how difficult they are worded, how vaguely the words are, and how difficult it is to find the right answer. Sometimes the choices are too close. So we are looking at both these elements today before we decide on the relative difficulty level of each of these. One of the passages today was on tech tools and tech devices. Very interesting to read passage. On a readability score, moderately difficult to read, I would say. Let's not use the word difficult. I would say it's a moderate passage. It would have enticed people. You would have got into it. And look at the questions were not all that difficult. 1 or 2 of them were slightly challenging. Hence, the overall difficulty level of the passage was between moderate and difficult. And this is one particular passage which had relatively close answer options. The second RC passage, the second one that we looked at, is the Mexican cave fish, and it's a passage on natural adaptation, how evolution works. This is one passage that was very easy to read, very smooth reading, easy words, very genuinely creates curiosity, interest. It's followed by questions which are not all that difficult. They were pretty much direct, and if you read the passage carefully, or if you miss certain points, if you go back to certain parts of the passage, it was very easy to identify the answers. So we would put this particular passage as moderate. It was relatively straightforward, and it had a few direct questions as well. So on the classification charts, this is an RC passage today which we would classify as being moderate. Then we had a passage on books and literary spaces. This had 4 questions in it, but this books and literary spaces was, I would say, very difficult to read, dense material. It is not something that students are used to reading on a day-to-day basis. Difficult to read? The answer questions were very twisted. Choices were very twisted, double negatives used in the question stem itself. You had to literally understand what the question stem was saying before proceeding to weed out or pick up the right answer. And this was not an easy exercise at all. We classify this particular passage as very difficult, simply because of the difficulty in terms of reading as well as in terms of the questions. The fourth passage was on scientific and astronomical instruments. Again, it would entice students to read it, but it was also a more difficult passage because it was trying to link certain concepts together, which is not naturally linked. The questions were not as difficult as the previous passage that we discussed, but nonetheless they were difficult. It was a difficult one to read, but if somebody paid attention to certain phrases, certain paragraphs there were a few questions which were direct in nature. You could have solved them. Overall, the difficulty level for this particular passage, we would rate it as a difficult passage. Overall, we would see that if somebody looked at the RC section and was able to identify, read 2 passages completely, answered them with a fair degree of accuracy, I would say it would be a job well done for today's VARC section. Now, coming to the verbal ability questions, we have a sentence placement question. There were 2 of them. And these sentence placement questions generally trouble students. They're not that straightforward. They're not for free hits. So we would classify the sentence placement today as being moderate to difficult. The other part that is there was the para summary. The para summary questions were 2 in number. However, given the nature of paragraphs and the way the summaries were worded, the choices, we classify this as on the difficult side. The odd one out was also on the difficult side. And para formation, which has made a comeback, there were 2 questions in para formation, and these 2 questions of para formation were about moderate, and one of them was on the very difficult side. So at least one attempt was possible out of those 2 over there. Now, when it comes to looking at this whole section, a lot of students look at VARC as a scoring section. And in the afternoon slot today, one would conclude that some of that scoring opportunity has been reduced because of the nature of the RC passages, and 2, the difficulty level in some of the VA questions as well. So certainly the top marks, the high scoring opportunities would have come down. But this would not be limited to a few people. It would be across the board. So this is another section which we are rating as difficult. And because this section is being rated moderate to difficult, definitely not moderate, certainly tending towards being more difficult, you would see that the scoring opportunities would not be as high as previous years. Attempting 2 passages with about 4 or 5 VA questions would be considered to be decent attempts in the afternoon slot today. The reason why this has become a challenging section is because of the difficult to read passages. If the passages were a little more easy to read, or if the question stems were more straightforward, this would have been a high scoring section for most people. However, that was not to be, and we find that this particular section is certainly going to be a difficult one. And the key towards doing well in today's VARC section is to select the passages carefully and then go through it till the end. This would be a key element of cracking this particular section. Let's listen to a soundbite of a student who's taking this test from Pune.
Hello, tell us your name, academic background, and how long did you prepare for the CAT?
My name is Rushiraj Kosandar. I have done my BA Political Science. I am currently invested in my business, and I have been preparing for CAT for 7 months.
Okay. So what's your strong section and how did you do in that?
My strong section is VARC, close to 16 questions, and let's see.
Oh, great. So how was your exam overall?
Exam was VARC and DILR was good, but I think Quant was on tougher side.
So how were the arrangements and experience at the test center?
It was quite chaotic and very crowded, and we couldn't able to find our labs properly. So,
okay.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Well, he found the situation on the ground to be chaotic, but certainly I hope it's not the case with your performance in the VARC section today. When you look at to conclude, we find that the section was definitely on the difficult side, but if you have cracked two RC passages, and we find that some of the VA questions were certainly doable. There were difficult ones in that as well, but certainly a few questions were definitely doable. If you were able to identify that, two VARC passages, so two RC passages plus about 4 or 5 VA questions would have been considered to be decent attempts, would go a long way in achieving your cutoffs. I would request all of you all to subscribe to the Time for Cat YouTube channel. We've got a lot of things to present, a lot of analysis coming up. We have slot 3 analysis also coming up. We've already got the percentile estimator. I hope each one of you has checked the percentile estimator. I hope each one of you has gone through the slot wise first cut analysis. The detailed analysis will follow shortly. In a few days' time, when the answer sheets are released by the IIMs, we'll also have the score calculator, we'll have the percentile predictor, we'll have the call predictor as well. So hit the button, like and subscribe, ensure that you're getting regular updates and you know what is going to happen with your CAT result. Thank you. That's for slot 2 today.